Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today we're thinking about power and conflict poetry for AQA GCSE English literature, and we're going to be looking at the poem My Last Duchess. Okay, My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. It's one of the more challenging poems. It's one of the older poems of the cluster, and it's got some archaic language and it's quite complex, but at the same time it's a lot of fun. It's a great story, a great moment, and it's got some really good, interesting uses of language for us to think about. Today, by the end of our time together, you're going to know what the poem's about, you're going to understand the structure and the effect of that, as well as some key uses of language in the poem. Okay, so we'll start by thinking about what the poem's about. The Duke of Ferrara is about to get married to the daughter of a count. So she's soon to be a duchess. The count has sent one of his men over to the Duke's house to talk about the wedding arrangements. And the Duke draws his attention to a portrait of his last duchess, who's now dead. And he hints, while he talks about the portrait and talks about what she was like, he hints at his involvement in her death. We're going to start with the reading of the poem, and then after that we'll start thinking about the meanings of it. So, Ferrara. That's my last duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now, for our Pandolf's hands work busily a day, and there she stands. But please you sit and look at her. I said for our Pandolf, by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst, how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps for our Pandolf chanced to say her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad. Too easily impressed, she liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one, my favourite at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fall broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one, and say just this or that in you disgusts me, here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be less than so, nor plainly set here her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew. I gave commands, and all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Wilt please you rise? We'll meet the company below. Then I repeat, the Count, your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed, at starting is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. My last duchess. So, we think very carefully about what the poem's about, and that's what we need to show that we understand. So our first paragraph, if we're in the exam, tells the examiner what we know about the poem and how it relates to the theme that will be in the question. If it's My Last Duchess, it's most likely to be about power. So we need to concisely, in only a couple of sentences, show that we understand what the poem's about. So here's my example here. My Last Duchess is about a duke who's sharing a portrait of his last duchess with a visitor. He's self-important and commanding and hints at his involvement in her death. And he has power and control over the portrait and treats it as if it's a living embodiment of her. So this portrait, he doesn't let anyone go near it. He's the one who he's the only one to touch the curtain that covers the portrait. And he looks at this portrait of his last duchess and treats it as if she's still alive. So he's got this very strange relationship with that painting, and also hints at the fact that he might have had her killed because she didn't respect him enough. We now need to think a little bit about structure for our second paragraph. So the second paragraph tells the reader, our examiner, that we understand the structure of the poem and the effect of that. So we just need to comment on the rhyme scheme of the metre of each of the two poems that we'll be writing about. So here's an example of that for My Last Duchess. The poem adopts iambic pentameter and uses rhyming couplets, which gives the Duke's speech confidence and authority. I really like how Browning writes the poem as one unbroken stanza to reflect how the powerful Duke speaks without interruption. He addresses you and not the other way round. So once we've done that, we've shown that we understand what the poem's about, and we've also shown that we understand the structure and the effect of it. We can then start analysing language. Now, this is a really tough poem. It's a long poem, and as well as that, there's a lot of action in it. Now, it's good to understand the poem and what the poem's about and study it in a little close detail. But when it comes to the exam, you've got 45 minutes to compare two poems. You're not going to be using more than 4 quotes from each of your chosen 2. So here are some uses of language here that we could use. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? So when he's talking about her trifling, he's talking about the fact that she didn't really respect his authority, his title, his power. And he's saying, who would put up with that? Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? And the use of this rhetorical question here, it's almost like he's justifying to himself his actions if he's been involved in having her killed or her death. So that's an interesting little moment there. There's lots of very subtle allusions to his involvement in her death put forward by Browning, and that's a great example of that. None but puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I. So we've got a little bit of assonance here, and it's quite interesting the way that this makes him seem really confident. And we've got this, it's a declarative, it shows that he's controlling. And this also explores the idea that he couldn't control her in her life when she was alive. Now he controls the painting. And he's got this real strange, possessive sort of relationship with the painting. This is my favourite bit in the whole poem, where he's thinking about what she was like in her life when she was alive, what sort of a person she was. And he says, she had a heart. And we've got this dash here. It's an extended pause. How shall I say? Too soon made glad. And I really love how Browning uses these dashes here for extended pauses. The rest of the poem is almost unbroken. There's a couple of uses of punctuation which give us those pauses. Ordinarily, the Duke is speaking constantly. And here we've got a little bit of a pause. She had a heart. How shall I say? Too soon made glad. So how shall I say? The pauses here, they could be for 2 reasons. One, he might be enjoying the fact that he's sort of just hinting at having her killed, but not giving too much away. So he could be enjoying alluding to having her killed and the power that he's had, and and the power that he has. It's reflecting the power that the Duke has here. But also he might be having to stop just to think very carefully about the words he's going to use, because he doesn't want to give too much away. So that's what we get there from those pauses. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. Now, this moment here is really ambiguous. What commands did he give? And the smiles stopping together, this is a bit where it's almost quite obvious that he's been involved in her death. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. It's almost like he's flagrantly saying that he's had her killed. And we've got this wonderful bit of assonance there. All smiles stopped. Sibilance rather. And it's gives this moment a little bit more dramatic impact and sort of makes this seem like a moment of finality. It's a really great little moment where we really do get an understanding of the Duke's self-importance and the power that he has. So for you to take your revision further, we've got this wonderful poem about a Duke who is standing in front of a portrait of his last Duchess and hinting at the fact that he might have had her killed because she didn't respect him enough. So some questions for you to think about. What kind of relationship does the Duke have with this portrait? Have a look back over the poem and see what evidence there is to show that he's got a strange relationship with this poem, and explore that a little bit further. 2, what's the key use of language in the poem, and what does it communicate? You should know a few key quotes from that. We've spoken about those with the flashcard that we've looked at. You should be able to recall those. What structure does the poem have, and what effect does it have? What does it reflect about the Duke, the way that the poem's written? And think carefully about how this poem is about power, and how that's a key theme in the poem, because the likelihood is, if you get My Last Duchess, you're going to be asked about how power is explored in the poem. I'll leave you with the assessment objectives. Do feel free to have a look at those and make sure that you are ready to comment on the poem in order to meet those assessment objectives when it comes to the examination. Okay, check out the other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content, and feel free to ask for something you'd like to see me cover in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share, and keep revising.